Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Exchequer webinar around the key system. Going to go through some security bits and some maintenance bits as well. I'm just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping for you at the moment. So this just is a slide for anybody that can see us but can't hear us, just to note to those people that you do need speakers or headphones just to be able to hear what's going on. And we are recording the webinar as well, so you will get a copy of it if you've signed up for it afterwards anyway. Everybody will be muted while I go through the presentation, just so that we don't get any feedback or anything like that. I know that in the current climate, a lot of us are working from home, but there is a little chat screen available for you as well at the top right. So there will be a Q&A section at the end if you want to type anything into that chat box. But of course, you can always contact me on support anyway, and I'll endeavour to help you and with any questions that you've got. So be going through, like I said, key system security and maintenance for Exchequer, but just a little bit of summary, some of the sections that we're going to be going through. So going to look at the user security and the permissions first. So what we can do around tightening up that access, making sure only the right people have got access to the right areas of the system. Bank details audit log, so another big area, obviously sensitive information, banking information, how you can lock down that section. I'm going to talk about some Excel reporting. So there's a new tool in Exchequer where you can export lists to Excel and how you can lock that down. We'll talk a little bit about data backup procedures and storage, and then I'll go through some tips for keeping the data clean, tidy and maintaining it. Okay, so I'm just going to launch right into Exchequer to start off talking about the user security and permissions. So in order to navigate to the section where you look at your user security and permissions, you'd go to Utilities, System Setup and User Management. Now, I'll go through some of the settings in this screen because some of them have changed in the last few versions, specifically allowing you to link Exchequer to your Windows user ID now, which is really useful, and also around some complexities that you can set against the Exchequer passwords. So when you first get into this user management screen, it is basically just a list of all of your active users and also any suspended users as well that you may have suspended manually, or they may have been suspended because their password has expired, or they've had failed login attempts as well, which we'll go through, and we'll see that when we go through the configuration. So the first part of this really is this configuration button here, which allows us to say how we're going to structure our Exchequer passwords. So are we basically going to use Exchequer authentication? And if we are, we can say that the password must contain uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, special characters, and we can set minimum password lengths on there as well. So a lot of businesses have certain password complexity policies, so you can set up Exchequer to meet that if need be. The other alternative is, and basically you'd have it set one of these two ways, is you can set it as Windows authentication. And what that means is that when users log into Exchequer, they'll be logging into Exchequer with the same password as their Windows profile as well. That setup needs a little bit of linking, i.e. you have to pop in your domain username and password, which we'll see in a moment. So sometimes you may just need to liaise with your IT person on site just to make sure that you've got those user accounts correct. What you can also do here, which is really useful, is suspend user after X amount of failed login attempts, which is really good in this day and age when, unfortunately, there are cyber criminals around. I'm sure we've all seen the news with things like that going on. So that's quite a useful thing to have. I'm actually just going to set this to 10 just for the purpose of this training, because I know what I'll do when I come to log into OLE later, and I'll probably forget my password. So don't want to lock myself out there. Okay. So moving on from this, as I said, things have changed around the password settings in the last few versions. So I'll just quickly go through some of the settings on here. So when you come to set up a new user, the first question you get is, do you want to create the user with the password access settings set to yes? So you've either got yes or no. Yes will set everything to yes. No will set everything to no. My advice on this is if you're setting up a user that's going to be a particularly high level user, do yes, and then you can untick what you don't need. If it's going to be a low level user, then do no, and you can tick on what you do need. So I'm just going to set yes here. This is where the suspended status is if you did have a user that you wanted to come in and set to suspended, but obviously as we're creating a new one, I'm just going to do active. So give it a username and a password. And then if we were set to link to our Windows user accounts in that configuration screen, this is where we would put our Windows user account. So this would be our domain / user ID. In this instance, I'm not linking it to a domain in a demo environment because I don't have one. So this is where you'd enter the password. And if you have entered a valid email address, you can say here that you want to randomly generate an email or password to the user, or you can say that you want to manually enter the password, and it will force us to do that when we save this user record. You can set the password to expire after so many days if you want to. So every 30 days, for example, you may want somebody to have their password expire and force them to create a new password. And then you can tick this box to automatically lock Exchequer after so many minutes of inactivity. That doesn't log Exchequer out, it just locks the screen and asks the user to enter the password when they come back to the screen. So quite useful for things like lunch times when people go off and maybe don't lock the PC as they should be doing. You can set that setting on there. So these settings here are all the same as they were before, just some defaults that you might want to set against certain settings and printers for that particular user, which is also carried through into this defaults tab here as well. Again, these were all there before the version update. So again, if you want any default sort of auth levels, general ledger codes, cost center department codes, that kind of thing. So what I want to talk about now is the access settings. So because we said that we wanted to create this user with full access settings, you'll see that all of the tick boxes within all of the folders are selected. What you can do when coming and setting up user access settings is you can say that you want to set a complete level to yes or set a complete level to no. So that's that complete folder level, which is really useful when setting up those users. You can also then tick or untick what you do and don't want that user to have access to. What's really useful when setting them up is this little interactive button here. So it basically mirrors the settings that you've just been setting up for this user. If you just look here and see that I've got access to the sales daybook currently, if I just say I'm going to set that sales level to no, and I hit the interactive button, you can see that it puts me in that interactive mode as if I were this user that I'm just setting up, and that sales daybook has disappeared. Just turn that back on and I'll just go back to normal. Okay, so that's a toggle between interactive mode and normal mode. All of the settings on here, just expanding and collapsing the levels and finding if you want to find a specific user setting. And the signatures tab as it was before, which is a standard email signature that you can amend per user once they're sent from Exchequer. Okay, so when I click OK here, because I didn't set it to randomly generate and send an email, it wants me to put in a password which will comply with that configuration that we set. So the minimum and maximum amount of characters, uppercase, lowercase, that kind of thing. Okay, you do need to tab out of that box to get this save button. Just a little hint there, that sometimes catches people out. Okay, so the only other thing I really wanted to talk about on access settings are two things actually. The first thing, just another tip on creating new users, is you do have a copy button over on the right hand side. I would always say try and use that copy button when setting up new users, especially if you might have somebody new starting in a department that's replacing somebody else. You can simply highlight that user and do copy over on the right hand side, so it will copy all of their access settings to this new profile that you're setting up. The other thing I just wanted to note was picking out a few specific access settings that are quite important when it comes to security of the system. So just a couple I wanted to draw attention to. The first one is around bank information. So within the purchase section and suppliers and supplier records, you've got these options here: view bank card details and allow bank details edit. So all I would really say with this is generally there should only be, you know, a varying amount of people in your purchase ledger department that need to have access to be able to change supplier bank details. And for everybody else, I would strongly suggest just turning off that access, just to save anything, you know, getting changed by accident when it shouldn't be done. The next one to point out is within stock and miscellaneous, this allow negative stock levels. I know it's not really around security, but just wanted to point that out while we're in here. Negative stock levels is one of the main causes for stock valuation reports not agreeing to the general ledger. So I would say with this, really, you should only be going negative if you know exactly why you're going negative and the goods are going to be coming in within a few days. Really, that's something that's controlled by, you know, a very small amount of people. So I would say turn that off where possible. The next thing is basically this whole utilities folder. So all the password accesses in here control everything under this utilities menu on your top toolbar. And generally, as you can see, that's anything to do with VAT setup, currency setup, system setup. It's also where your password settings were, where we came to earlier on. So really, it defeats the object of being very tight on password settings if someone then has access to go into that password settings screen themselves. So maybe only just, you know, have a system admin who has access to this utilities section. And then the final one to point out in here is the Excel OLE link. So we'll talk a little bit about OLE shortly, but I just wanted to point out a lot of people tend to just set everything within this folder up, and it's worth just thinking about the gets and the saves. So for every single OLE type, you've got a get as well as a save. Not many people need to actually save back to Exchequer, and that can be quite dangerous if, you know, users don't know what they're doing with those saves and they save something back that they shouldn't have done, because unless you've got a backup, that's not, you know, it's not easily recoverable. So maybe just worth considering who has access to get data out and who has access to save back within each of these folders as well. Okay, so that covers everything on actually setting up the new users. I'm going to move on to talk about bank details audit log. So this basically picks back up from where we were talking about those two settings on the bank. There is actually an audit log within this utilities folder, which actually allows us to see if anything like that has been changed. And that's from utilities and system setup and system audit. So if I come into here, I can see a full list. I think the most recent's at the bottom, yes. And what this will log and tell us is if there's been any login failures, like we can see here. If anything's been changed in the general settings, we can see here, so what the field was, what the original value was, and what the new value is. And of course, you can see who changed that and what date and what time. And also, very importantly, it will tell us if any bank information has been changed. Again, what fields they were, what the original value was, what the new value is, and who changed it on what date and what time. So that's just a useful tool for system administrators. Just, I would advise just to be checking that on a weekly or monthly basis, just to see what's been going on within the system. Of course, again, just consider tying down access to that report. It defeats the object of letting users, you know, looking at users that might be changing that information if they can go and see and adapt that report anyway. So if we go back into our user management section and into our access settings against utilities, there is a tick switch in here somewhere here, which allows access to that system audit file. So again, just reviewing and making sure that only system administrators have access to that. Just while we're talking about audit reports, there are a couple of other audit reports that are quite useful in terms of transactionally what's happened against those transactions in terms of edits. So if we look in reports, miscellaneous reports, audit trail, and then you've got an audit notes report for your customers, jobs, suppliers, stock and transactions. So if I just run this for transactions, for example, you can put a date range on there if you wish. I'm just going to run it to screen, but as with all Exchequer reports, you can run those to Excel and email as well if you wish. What that's going to do is just create a list of those particular transactions in that date range, what date those transactions were created and who by, and what date they were edited and who by. You can also view that information on a transactional by transactional basis. So if I open up this transaction, for example, and go onto the Notes tab, you've got this Switch To button at the bottom right. And if I do Audit History Notes, it tells me this was created yesterday by manager, and it was then edited later by manager. So that's quite useful if you, if there's some kind of thing that's happened on a transaction, you're not really sure why, you need to have a chat with somebody about it. It will point you in the right direction of who you need to speak to about that. Okay, next section then, Excel exports and how you would lock that down. So a really handy tool within Exchequer, which has come in within the latest few versions, is this export to Excel button here. So at the moment that's grayed out, and that's just because there's nothing on screen. What that will do, as soon as there's some kind of list available on screen, so a customer list, a supplier list, a ledger, a general ledger list, or a stock list, that kind of thing, this button will become highlighted so that you can export the current row to Excel, export the current page to Excel, or export potentially the entire list to Excel. So if I just do entire list, it's exporting that to Excel now, and the useful thing that it will do is if you've already got an Excel document open, it will just create a new worksheet on that Excel document, which is quite good if you're wanting to build up a picture and get all of your information from Exchequer all in one workbook. So if I just go to Excel now, I can see that that's exported that whole list. Now, that's really useful for us in some instances, but of course we need to be security aware, and we may not want all users to be able to have access to export our customer lists, stock lists, nominal lists, that kind of thing. So if I flip back into Exchequer, I'll show you where we can control the access for that Excel exports. And you've probably guessed it already, but within the user management, it is actually in that utilities section we were talking about. So if I go back to access settings, go to utilities, and I think it's towards the bottom. Yes, access to allow export of Excel. So again, untick that where that's not required and where you don't want users to be having access for that. Okay, just wanted to move on to talk a little bit about data backup and storage. Now really there isn't anything as such I can really show you on screen when it comes to backing up Exchequer, because it all really depends upon your company's backup procedures and your disaster recovery plans. But as a minimum, we would always say make sure Exchequer is fully backed up at least every evening. And when we say backup, that would be the Exchequer program data folder. And if you are running the Exchequer SQL, the MS SQL version of Exchequer, you would need to make sure that that SQL database is backed up as well, which is generally something that your IT team would take care of. It is worth noting as well that users need to be logged out of Exchequer when you're taking those backups. So if you leave Exchequer open on an evening and you're on the pervasive version, files could be skipped on backups if they're in use. So it's just important to make sure that people save what they're doing on an evening and make sure that they log out so there's no interruptions like that. If we at HBP provide your IT, we'll always make sure that the data is fully backed up. We will have always discussed disaster recovery plans with you. But if you are unsure about any of that side of it, then please do give us a call on the help desk. Okay, so now I'm moving into the last section, but it is quite a large section in terms of my tips for looking after your data and your system maintenance. So my first thing would always be keep it tidy. So in terms of keeping your system tidy, it's always really good for both storage space, because we don't want servers full up with information that's not required, but also to keep records very easily accessible. So when it comes to things like customer, supplier records, stock records, nominal records, job records, of course, if we've put transactions against them, those records can't be deleted because we need to see that history there for a varying amount of time for audit purposes. But what we can do with those accounts is we can mark them as inactive or closed, so that we can see them for historical and reporting purposes, but end users can't start posting transactions to them. So for customers and suppliers, to actually put an account on hold is very easy. You've got this status box here. Now you can't type into that box, but you'd use your status button on the right hand side and you just move them to closed. And that basically means that nobody will be able to post any transactions against that account now. You won't be able to see it in those lookup lists. And that's the same for suppliers. It's also the same for jobs if you use the job costing module, but of course it is slightly differently in terms of if you are working on a job and you're closing it, it's going to go through a routine of transferring all of that work in progress for you. So I'm just going to show you one here that's already completed, but what we would have done to complete that job is go to status and close, and then it would have popped up and asked us to transfer with a little wizard on screen. Okay, the other thing is general ledger codes. Again, you'd still want the history, so you may want to mark it as inactive, and that is as simple as just right clicking on that general ledger code, go to records and edit, and then you've got a tick box here to make that account inactive again, so that nobody else can post to that code moving forward. And then with stock, it's a similar kind of process, but you're actually making a stock item discontinued. So you've got a type drop down list here against your stock item. If I hit edit on the right hand side, I can change that type to discontinued, and it just means again nobody will be able to post anything to this stock item. I would always make sure though that there isn't anything in stock for that item before you discontinue it. So obviously think about adjusting that out somewhere else if there's any stock that's left. The good thing with this is that your customers and suppliers can be done via OLE. So obviously customers and suppliers are probably the things that you're going to need to be marking as inactive on a more regular basis, over and above your probably GL codes and stock codes, that kind of thing. So for those of you that haven't used OLE before, I have done quite a good video which is available on our portal called An Introduction to OLE. It just gives you a really good brief overview of how you can use OLE and pointing you towards where you can see a library of functions to give you a good idea on how you can start using it for your business. But I'll just go into Excel and do a little bit of a quick example now, just to show you how to use those OLE saves if we want to update our customer and supplier statuses to closed. So the first thing that you'd always really start with when you're trying to extract data out of Exchequer into Excel using OLE add-ins is you'd want to put your company code in one of the cells here. And that's just so that every time we pull anything through, we're telling it what company we're pulling it through, which is especially important if you've got more than one company set up on your Exchequer system. Okay, and then you'd always start Excel with pulling through a list of whatever it is you're going to be querying, so customers, suppliers, stock, nominal. And you do this via the add-ins button that you've got on your top toolbar, and then you'd go to Exchequer. And then in this instance, we're going to pull through a list of customers. So what this will do is it'll just pop up a little login on the bottom screen. So it wants us to select the company. So as I said before, if you've got more than one company on your Exchequer system, it'll ask you to select which one you're pulling it from. And then it wants us to log in. So if you remember before, we were setting up OLE access within the password settings, and that's where it looks. We can filter by range of account code if we only wanted so many, or we can just go straight past this to pull a list through. Okay, so at the moment that might not mean a lot to you because your account codes might be numbers or letters that aren't really specific to the customer that you're working with. So we might want to then start building on this and pulling through, for example, the customer name. That's where we'd start to insert functions. Okay, so when we're inserting a function, you would always have user defined selected from this drop down list, and that's where your Exchequer add-ins fall within this user defined section. And I know that the formula that I'm looking for is ent customer name. So you can actually type it on your keyboard to take you to that location, or you can scroll through the list. There are quite a few, but I will show you in a moment where you can get to a library of functions so you know which one you're looking for. So if I select ent customer name, it's now going to say, well, which company do you want me to pull this information from? And this is why we put this company code here. So I'm just going to click on that once. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit F4 on my keyboard, and F4 is a toggle. If I press this a few times, you'll see what happens. What this is doing is locking that cell, and you'll see why in a moment when I drag my formulas down. So I'm locking this to cell A1. I always want it to look in A1 for my company code. I don't want it to look anywhere else. Then when I look at my customer code, I'm going to look in A3. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to press my F4 toggle. Actually, once I've logged in, bear with me. It will be popping up another login box somewhere, but I just can't find that minimized on my system whilst I'm sharing it. Bear with. Want to play ball today. I think it's just because I'm sharing my screen. Apologies for this. But what this should be doing is popping up and asking you to log into Excel again a second time. But I think it's probably not going to do that for us. Let me just log out of a few of these screens. No. Apologies for this, we're having a few problems with that. I think I might have to crash Excel. There it is. Didn't like all the screens I'd opened for some reason. Right, okay, so sorry about that. It will ask you to pop a login a second time. So it asks you the first time you pull through the wizard, and it asks you the first time you try and pull through a function. It won't ask you any other times. It's only those couple of times just for security purposes. So I'm just going to log in. Okay, and I've told it I want to pull my customer code from A3. But I'm going to toggle this a couple of times, and you'll actually see that the dollar is in front of column A now and not in front of row 3. And that's because I'm going to drag the formula down. So I always want it to stick in A, but I want it to move with my rows. So it'll make more sense in a moment. So if I click OK, I can see that that's AB Applications Limited. And if I double click this and copy it down, with that clever locking that we did, it's going to pull through all of the customers. So that looks a bit like something to me now. I recognise those customers. The next thing I might want to do is pull through the status. So if I insert another formula now, and I'm looking for ent cust status. Again, which company? So it's in A1. I'll press F4 to lock that. Which customer code? It's in A3, and I'm just going to press my F4 as a toggle. Lock column A. Okay, so that's pulled through all of the statuses. We can see AB applications is closed now. That's the one that I manually set to close earlier on. Now, if we want to save back our statuses, your OLE saves go into a separate column. And what I'm going to do with this is just do a few as an example. So I might just say, actually, I'm going to set them all to be open, but then go through one by one and say, actually, this is closed, this is closed, this is closed, this is closed, this is on hold, but there may be a few more that I want to set to closed. So I can just go through and set whichever those ones I need. Once I'm happy with that list, I need to insert a save function. So insert function again, user defined, and then this time it's ent cust save status. And I couldn't type that quick enough, so we'll search for it. Ent cust save. Get there in a moment. Ent cust save status. Okay, so again, where's the company? Where's the customer code? And where's my new status that I want to save back? It's here. If I click OK, that immediately saves that. And if I copy this down, that's saved all of them. So you could do one at a time and add that function in, but that's why I set them all to open and then manually went through and closed the one I wanted to, because it's probably quicker to do it this way and copy it down. If I just have a look at Astra 01, for example, that was open before that's now closed, we'll just demonstrate that that's worked. So I had to close Exchequer when we were having a few problems. Let's just log back in. Okay, so it was Astra 01. And we can see that the status is set to closed. Just to kind of demonstrate how I say dangerous, they're very clever, the OLE saves, but if you're unsure of what you're doing, how dangerous they could be. So Astra 01, if I then just say O, what you'll see is because that formula is there and that's constantly working, Astra is now back as an open account. And one thing that I will say to you is be very, very careful saving OLE spreadsheets. So a lot of people spend a lot of time building up these spreadsheets. You know, we could have pulled in address columns, email columns, all sorts of things within here. And if you save that spreadsheet with your saves active, what will happen is every time you go to open that spreadsheet, it will save them all because that formula is there. So let's say, for argument's sake, you hadn't used this spreadsheet for 12 months and you'd manually been opening and closing accounts in Exchequer. As soon as you come back in here, it's going to save them all. So I'm just going to delete that completely. I would delete that column before I save my spreadsheet, and then only put the saves in as and when you want to do them. Okay, so that was just homing back on how we can change that password access setting for people for the gets and the saves, and maybe only have a few people having access to the saves. The stock unfortunately can't be changed in here, so we can't mark stock items as discontinued, but OLE can be really good if you want to pull through a list of stock items and update prices, discounts, descriptions, alternative supplier codes. So the possibilities with this are endless, really, in terms of updating that static information that you hold within Exchequer. In order to sort of see all of the functions that you've got available to you, if you come into the help files within Exchequer and help contents, if I go to Exchequer OLE help, and then you've got OLE functions and a categorical reference. You can see here you've got your gets and you've got your saves. So if I wanted to look at what customer saves I had available to me, I'd click in here and you can see it tells me all of the codes that you've got. But what's really useful here as well is if I look for the save status that we've just done, for example, which is here, you can hover over any of these hyperlinks to tell you a little bit more. So for example, it tells us that O is open, N is notes, H is on hold and C is closed. So that's quite useful because it tells you what kind of information it's going to ask from you when you do that OLE function and why it's going to ask for it. So a really good reference library there. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk to you about in terms of keeping data tidy is the menu designer. So within tools and options, what this allows you to do, the Exchequer menus, as you're probably all aware, are very static. So everything is where it is and you can't move it. But what you can do is add new things into the menus if you need to, specifically things like visual report writer reports. So if I navigate to reports, you can see this orange folder here, HBP reports. Anything orange is something I've created in the menu designer. All the grayed out ones are the ones that are system static ones that can't be changed. So you might want to add a subfolder into here to be your company reports. So you would highlight that folder and you'd say add option and say yes to add that in. So I might call that, I'll call myself AB applications. Want to see AB applications reports. You can make it available just for this company or for all companies. You can allow access from all users, or you can untick that just to give access to specific users if need be. And bear with me, I know what I've done there. Actually add submenu rather than add option. We'll come on to add option in a moment. Okay, so if I then go into reports, I can see I've got this submenu for AB applications reports. There isn't an arrow taking me anywhere because I haven't put anything in that folder yet. So if I go back into my menu designer and into reports and my AB applications reports, this is where I can say add report. And what that then does is it presents the Exchequer report writer to me, and I can choose whatever report it is that I need to add to there. So I might have a specific report I want to add on. Again, you can set your access for your company and your users. If I now go into reports, I can see there's my report, and it basically saves me having to go into the visual report writer to run that report, which you might want to do for some of your users. Again, it's one of those things where you might want to tie down access to the visual report writer just to an admin, and then any reports that people need, just publish them onto a menu to keep things tidy and to keep that access secure. When you select that, it just takes you straight into the normal screen as it would do for running that report, so you don't have to go into the report writer. Other things that you can do within the menu designer, I've added one earlier here called HBP tools. So again, that was just a sub menu I added. But I've added an option within there for Excel. So basically anything that's like a web URL or an Excel or an application or a PDF file, anything like that that you use on quite a regular basis, you may want to add a link to. And here we've just called it Excel. And we've just browsed and picked up the target path for Excel. Again, you can set all of your access. So if I just go to HBP tools and Excel, it's going to launch Excel for us from within the Exchequer window. So quite useful in terms of defining workspaces for people that might use Exchequer and one or two other applications. You can maybe link them from within Exchequer so that everything's in one place for them. Talking about reports a little bit more on the whole keep it tidy subject, if I actually come into my report writer, what can become quite common is a lot of people having a go at writing their own reports, and especially in big businesses, other people may not know that those reports exist. And I have seen quite a few instances where somebody will ring me up and say, oh, can you create me a report to show me, I don't know, outstanding orders by customer or something. And I'll come in here and have a look. And actually that report already exists because Bob created it in the system 2 years ago. And because they can't see the wood for the trees, they're creating the same reports time and time again, which is obviously a waste of time and money. So my advice on this is really just keep this as structured as you can. I've just put these reports here as an example to show you how you can tidy things up. You can move reports into different subfolders. So if I highlight this report and select move, and then I might want to put that in my stock folder, and I do drop, it's moved that report into there just to tidy that up. What you can also do, you can create new groups, new folders if you want to. It's worth noting that these folders don't link with that tools menu at all. It's its own folder within the report writer. If you wanted to mirror that folder within the tools menu, you would set it up in there as well. So if I just highlight this report and do add report, and I'm going to call this AB apps reports. Get a name, and the type here would be report group, and then that's created a brand new blank group for me, which I can move reports into. Just a note on removing reports that are no longer needed. The delete button isn't on the right hand side here, so it's quite a common support query I get in terms of how to delete them. You just highlight the report itself and do file and delete from the top rather than on the side. So just worth noting, maybe a task to just tidy up those reports as well if need be. Okay. Another thing on keeping things tidy is all around logging out correctly. So I know I mentioned this earlier on in terms of making sure you log out so that your backups run successfully. But in the current climate, we've got a lot of people who are working remotely from home, either on like a screen share or remote desktop session. And it's quite important to make sure you log out of Exchequer using the red cross at the top here, but you also log off your terminal server session correctly, which would be through the Windows key, and you'd have a little user icon here. And depending upon what Windows version you're using, you'd have either a sign out or a log off. If some of you do use remote desktop sessions, you'll probably recognise that you quite often have a blue bar across the top of the screen. Now that does have a little X on it, and what a lot of people tend to do is just close that X to close it. But what that isn't doing is it's not closing Exchequer and it's not logging your session off. So it's just leaving everything open. And what that can do is in turn cause locked files, cause problems with backup, locked users and disconnected sessions, which basically ends up eating up your user count. So it thinks those users are logged in and they're not. And then you're potentially having to reboot the server to clear them out. So it's just a case of making sure that you do close out of Exchequer and you do log off your terminal server session correctly. I just wanted to show you a little bit of a couple of tools on how you can see who is logged into Exchequer if you need to. So you can do that on the multi-company manager screen by going to tools and logged in user report. And if you just print that to screen, what that will do is tell us any users. At the moment, obviously I've logged out, but it would tell us any user ID that is logged in and where they're logged in from. And another tip, which not a lot of people notice actually, because it's grayed out a little bit, but when you are logging into Exchequer, at the bottom right of the screen, it'll tell you the user count. So at the moment, no 1 out of 5 users is logged in. So that's quite a useful thing to monitor as well if you need to. Okay, just log back in. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about is clearing old log files. So a lot of you have probably seen messages pop up before that say things like, you've got many error log files, do you want to clear them, do you want to delete them? This isn't anything to worry about. All those error log files is anytime a user gets an error on screen, it will create it in a log folder in the background, really for us as support purposes, so that we can see those log files if we need to for any sort of data investigation. And what the system does is when that file gets to a certain point, in a size, it will warn you just to clear them out, just to keep things nice and clean and tidy. Those error logs, you can give us a call and we can help you out with clearing them, but they basically will be in their own folder within your Exchequer installation. So your Exchequer installation is likely to be on a map drive. Normally we put it on the K drive or the X drive, and you'll have your Exchequer folder within there. You'll always have a logs folder. And if you open that, that can become quite full. It's full of logs that tell us, like I say, a little bit about what the problem was and by who and on what PC. To clear them, you can simply just highlight them all, so Control A, and just hit delete and clear them. Don't delete the logs folder itself, just delete the files from within it, and that will just clear them out. Worth noting, if you've got more than one company on that multi-company manager, you'll have a logs folder within every company subfolder. So for example, I've got another company here, which has also got its own logs folder beneath it. And there's not many in there, it's not a big company. So that's how you can just clear those down. And then one last point, actually, which I forgot to mention to you on the data, is this little percentage bar here at the bottom left. A lot of people ask me what that's for. What that means is that there's 80% space left on the drive that Exchequer's installed in. So like I said before, if Exchequer's running on your K drive or X drive, I've got 80% space left on that drive on my server. You only really need to start worrying if that gets down to you know, lower than 10%, and it will turn red. And that's when you need to think about clearing off some things from your Exchequer drive. You probably need to chat to your IT team about it. There could be old backups on there that have been deleted, or people could have been saving old information on there that's no longer required. Okay, so that actually covers everything in terms of the security and the maintenance side of Exchequer that I was going to go through today. But because we've got 10 minutes or so left, I'll just actually finish off with a few key points from Exchequer, not really relating to maintenance and security, but they're little bits and bobs in Exchequer that I always find that not many people know about, and the niceties in the system that I think can become quite useful. So I just wanted to share those with you quickly. So the first one is all around screen sizes and how you can change those. So any screen that you've got in Exchequer, if you want to resize it, you can just hover and drag. And it's quite useful. Different people quite often want to set those at their own preference. And you can do that by resizing it, right clicking, and then doing save coordinates. Next time we come into this screen, it opens at the size that I last saved it at, which is quite useful. You can right click and go into properties and do some things where you change your text and your colours and things like that. But what I would say is be quite sensible with your resizing and your recolouring. You know, don't have everything sort of this size and bright pink, because it will just take a long time to load those screens. But it is really, really useful in terms of fitting all of your columns in. Another thing that I wanted to talk to you about quickly is the sort views. So you've got this sort view button here that you can see on the sales daybook, but it's also available on the purchase daybook. It's available on the ledgers, customers and supplier lists, stock lists, that kind of thing. The best example I can think to give you with it is actually if I do a sort view on my customer list. So I've set one up here called balance, and I'll just show you how I set it up. Obviously I selected the add button and I gave it a name, and I sorted on the balance. So you can sort on balance, account code, name and telephone number, and you can sort in descending or ascending order. You can have a secondary sort if you wish, and then you can save the sort just for yourself, or you can save it for all users to be able to see. And then on the filtering, you can have up to 4 filters, and these are all of the fields in the customers that you can actually filter on. So you might only want to see customers in certain areas or for certain cost centres, that kind of thing. In this instance, what I've done is I've said I want to see everybody with a balance greater than £10,000. Once I've created my sort view, I can set it as default, and that would be for everybody, so it's worth just taking care with that. Or I can come in and apply my sort. Okay, so you've got a big blue arrow here, and that means that the sort's in progress. If you don't want the sort in progress, you can just come into here and do close view or refresh view. But the reason that I chose to do it on customers is I want to show you something that I think is quite clever and quite useful in terms of chasing debts in Exchequer. So I'm just going to use my resize to resize this screen a little bit. And if I go into search, I've got this object credit controller. And what this does is it gives us a bit of a snapshot of that customer's credit position at any one point in time. So the debtor days, the oldest debt, credit limit balance, and the aging of the debt, which is quite useful to have on screen if you were calling to chase debt. But what you could also do is have a third screen open, which is their ledger. And again, if I use my drag and my resize, I might then want to filter this just to show what's outstanding. Resize my screens a bit to fit. I am on a laptop, so I'm on, you know, a smaller screen, but if you were on a PC screen, it can be quite useful. And then what we can see is as we flick down this list, it refreshes everything. So, you know, I've flicked down to Linton Alarm, and it's refreshed this screen to Linton Alarm and this screen to Linton Alarm. So as you go through, you get a feel for where you're at, what transactions have got outstanding, what their oldest debt is, their average debtors days. It's all on screen, all in one place, ready for you as you're going through making those calls. So quite a useful thing there. If I close this, it will close both of those down, and then I can just close my object credit controller. There is a similar thing available on the stock, which is an object stock lookup. So if I open my stock list and then go to search and object stock inquiry, again for the currently highlighted stock code, it will tell me how many are in stock, how many are due to come in on orders, how many might be due to go out on works orders, sales orders, and how many are picked. And again, that refreshes based upon the stock item that you're flicking through in the list. You can also click on location if you want to have a quick view of how many are in stock at what location. So again, quite a good lookup tool in terms of your stock. There is actually a similar one which allows you to do a price lookup. So if you had quite heavily discounted stock items, price bands, that kind of thing, then they would all show up here as well on that stock lookup. And then the last little Exchequer tip, which I really like, is the general ledger clone. So again, with the use of resizing and moving your screens around, if I open my general ledger tree and then right click and do object clone, it will open another general ledger tree for me. If I then open a third, drag it down here, and then do object clone difference. What this is going to do, if I set this to a year, it's demo data, so a year that's got some data in it, it will tell me the difference between the two screens, and anything that I do on the first screen is reflected on the others, so we can see the percentage difference and the value difference. And that's not just necessarily for a difference in period and year. Bearing in mind you've got your general ledger filters, so you may want to filter one tree by a certain currency, or you may want to right click and filter one tree by a certain cost center so you can see the differences. And all this is available through OLE as you're reporting, but quite often it's quite nice to have a little snapshot on screen if there's something that you need to look at from that perspective. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to my slideshow, which actually I closed when we had those problems with the login earlier on. So let me just open that back up, and I'll just quickly whiz through just to go through what we've covered today and just make sure that that's all fresh in everybody's minds, really. So we've talked about the user security and permissions. So thinking about whether you want to have complexities on your Exchequer passwords or whether you want to link it to your Windows logins. thinking about those key access settings that I said, so making sure people don't have access to the bank if they don't need it. Same for the utilities menu, same for things like your OLE saves. We talked about your bank details and your audit log. So obviously bank is very, very sensitive information, making sure only the people that need it have access, and also reviewing that audit log on a regular basis to see if there's been any failed login attempts, any changes to bank records, any changes to system setup. We talked about the Excel exports, so that's a really useful feature to export sort of lists from screen to Excel. But again, thinking about it's great for us, but does everybody have to have access to it? Data backup and storage, so thinking about your backups, making sure you've got a disaster recovery plan in place, making sure Exchequer is backed up at least every evening and that everybody logs out on an evening, especially if they're using those remote desktop server connections from home. And then some tips around the data and the system maintenance. So the things around keeping things tidy, using OLE to mark your customers and suppliers as closed, and setting those GL codes and stock codes as inactive, using the menu designer where you might want to put visual report writer reports on there or links to external applications that you might be using, and making sure that those visual report writer reports are tidy, as well as logging out correctly and clearing your log files. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening, everybody. We are always looking for ideas to run new webinars. So if anybody does have any questions at all, then please do let me know. And if anyone's got any ideas for webinars, also let me know, because as I say, we like to run them to keep you all informed. If anyone's got any questions, there is a question box at the top right that you can type into, or of course you can give me a call or drop me an email on support, as with anything really. So I'll just hang around for a few moments and see if there is anything that pops up. But if not, thank you very much for listening today.